USS Lexington, nicknamed Lady Lex, was an early aircraft carrier built for the United States Navy. She was the lead ship of the Lexington class. Her only sister ship, Saratoga, was commissioned a month earlier. Originally designed as a battle cruiser, she was converted into one of the Navy's first aircraft carriers during construction to comply with the terms of the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922, which essentially terminated all new battleship and battlecruiser construction. The ship entered service in 1928 and was assigned to the Pacific Fleet for her entire career. Lexington and Saratoga were used to develop and refine carrier tactics in a series of annual exercises before World War II. On more than one occasion, these included successfully staged surprise attacks on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The ship's turboelectric propulsion system allowed her to supplement the electrical supply of Tacoma, Washington, during a drought in late 1929 to early 1930. She also delivered medical personnel and relief supplies to Managua, Nicaragua, after an earthquake in 1931. Lexington was at sea when the Pacific War began on 7 December 1941, ferrying fighter aircraft to Midway Island. Her mission was cancelled and she returned to Pearl Harbor a week later. After a few days, she was sent to create a diversion from the force en route to relieve the besieged Wake Island garrison by attacking Japanese installations in the Marshall Islands. The island was forced to surrender before the relief force got close enough, and the mission was cancelled. A planned attack on Wake Island in January 1942 had to be cancelled when a submarine sank the oiler required to supply the fuel for the return trip. Lexington was sent to the Coral Sea the following month to block any Japanese advances into the area. The ship was spotted by Japanese search aircraft while approaching Rabaul, New Britain, and her aircraft shot down most of the Japanese bombers that attacked her. Together with the carrier Yorktown, she successfully attacked Japanese shipping off the east coast of New Guinea in early March. Lexington was briefly refitted in Pearl Harbor at the end of the month and rendezvoused with Yorktown in the Coral Sea in early May. A few days later, the Japanese began Operation Mo, the invasion of Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, and the two American carriers attempted to stop the invasion forces. They sank the light aircraft carrier Shoho on 7 May during the Battle of the Coral Sea, but did not encounter the main Japanese force of the carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku until the next day. Aircraft from Lexington and Yorktown succeeded in badly damaging Shokaku, but the Japanese aircraft crippled Lexington. Vapors from leaking aviation gasoline tanks sparked a series of explosions and fires that could not be controlled, and Lexington had to be scuttled by an American destroyer during the evening of 8 May to prevent her capture. Design and construction. Lexington was the fourth U.S. Navy ship named after the 1775 Battle of Lexington, the first battle of the Revolutionary War. She was originally authorized in 1916 as a Lexington-class battle cruiser, but construction was delayed so that higher priority anti-submarine vessels and merchant ships, needed to ensure the safe passage of personnel and materiel to Europe during Germany's U-boat campaign, could be built. After the war, the ship was extensively redesigned, partially as a result of British experience. Given the high number of CC-1, Lexington was laid down on 8 January 1921 by Fall River Shipbuilding Company of Quincy, Massachusetts. Before the Washington Naval Conference concluded, the ship's construction was suspended in February 1922, when she was 24.2% complete. She was redesignated and reauthorized as an aircraft carrier on 1 July 1922. Her displacement was reduced by a total of 4,000 long tons, achieved mainly by the elimination of her main armament of 8 16-inch guns in 4 twin turrets. The main armor belt was retained, but was reduced in height to save weight. The general line of the hull remained unaltered, as did the torpedo protection system, because they had already been built. and it would have been too expensive to alter them. The ship had an overall length of 888 feet, a beam of 106 feet, and a draft of 30 feet 5 inches at deep load. Lexington had a standard displacement of 36,000 long tons and 43,056 long tons at deep load. At that displacement, she had a metacentric height of 7.31 feet. Christened by Mrs. Theodore Douglas Robinson, the wife of the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Lexington was launched on 3 October 1925. She was commissioned on 14 December 1927 with Captain Albert Marshall in command. By 1942, the ship had a crew of 100 officers and 1,840 enlisted men and an aviation group totaling 141 officers and 710 enlisted men. Flight deck arrangements. The ship's flight deck was 866 feet 2 inches long and had a maximum width of 105 feet 11 inches. When built, her hangar was the largest single enclosed space afloat on any ship, and had an area of 33,528 square feet. It was 424 feet long and 68 feet wide. Its minimum height was 21 feet, and it was divided by a single fire curtain just forward of the aft aircraft elevator. Aircraft repair shops, 108 feet long, were aft of the hangar, and below them was a storage space for disassembled aircraft, 128 feet long. Lexington was fitted with 2 hydraulically powered elevators on her centerline. The forward elevator's dimensions were 30 by 60 feet and it had a capacity of 16,000 pounds. The aft elevator had a capacity of only 6,000 pounds and measured 30 by 36 feet. If gas was stored in 8 compartments of the torpedo protection system, and their capacity has been quoted as either 132,264 US gallons or 163,000 US gallons. Lexington was initially fitted with electrically operated arresting gear designed by Carl Norden that used both fore and aft and transverse wires. This system was authorized to be replaced by the hydraulically operated Mk2 system, without longitudinal wires, on the 11th of August 1931. 4 improved Mk3 units were added in 1934, giving the ship a total of 8 arresting wires and 4 barriers intended to prevent aircraft from crashing into parked aircraft on the ship's bow. After the forward flight deck was widened in 1936, an additional 8 wires were added there to allow aircraft to land over the bow if the landing area at the stern was damaged. The ship was built with a 155-foot, flywheel-powered, FMK2 aircraft Catapults, also designed by Norden, on the starboard side of the bow. This catapult was strong enough to launch a 10,000-pound aircraft at a speed of 48 knots. It was intended to launch seaplanes, but was rarely used. A 1931 report tallied only 5 launches of practice load since the ship had been commissioned. It was removed during the ship's 1936 refit. Lexington was designed to carry 78 aircraft, including 36 bombers. But these numbers increased once the Navy adopted the practice of tying up spare aircraft in the unused spaces at the top of the hangar. In 1936, her air group consisted of 18 Grumman F-2 F-1 and 18 Boeing F-4B-4 fighters, plus an additional 9 F-2 Fs in reserve. Offensive punch was provided by 20 Vought SBU Corsair dive bombers with 10 spare aircraft and 18 Great Lakes BG torpedo bombers with 9 spares. Miscellaneous aircraft included 2 Grumman JF Duck amphibians, plus 1 in reserve, and 3 active and 1 spare of Auto 2U Corsair observation aircraft. This amounted to 79 aircraft, plus 30 spares. Propulsion. The Lexington-class carriers used turboelectric propulsion. Each of the 4 propeller shafts was driven by 2 22,500 shaft horsepower electric motors. They were powered by 4 General Electric turbo generators rated at 35,200 kilowatts. Steam for the generators was provided by 16 Yarrow boilers, each in its own individual compartment. 6 750-kilowatt electric generators were installed in the upper levels of the two main turbine compartments to provide power to meet the ship's hotel load requirements. The ship was designed to reach 33.25 knots, but Lexington achieved 34.59 knots from 202,973 shp during sea trials in 1928. She carried a maximum of 6,688 long tons of fuel oil, but only 5,400 long tons of that was usable, as the rest had to be retained as ballast in the port fuel tanks to offset the weight of the island and main guns. Designed for a range of 10,000 nautical miles at a speed of 10 knots, the ship demonstrated a range of 9,910 nmi at a speed of 10.7 knots with 4,540 long tons of oil. Armament. The Navy's Bureau of Construction and Repair was not convinced when the class was being designed that aircraft could effectively substitute as armament for a warship, especially at night or in bad weather that would prevent air operations. Thus, the carrier's design included a substantial gun battery of 8.55 caliber Mk9 8-inch guns in 4 twin-gun turrets. These turrets were mounted above the flight deck on the starboard side, 2 before the superstructure, and 2 behind the funnel, numbered I to IV from bow to stern. In theory, the guns could fire to both sides, but it is probable that if they were fired to port, the blast would have damaged the flight deck. They could be depressed to -5 degrees and elevated to +41 degrees. The ship's heavy anti-aircraft armament consisted of 12 25 caliber Mk10 5-inch guns which were mounted on single mounts, 3 each fitted on sponsons on each side of the bow and stern. No light Aaa guns were initially mounted on Lexington, but 2 sextuple 30 caliber machine gun mounts were installed in 1929. They were unsuccessful and were replaced by 2 50 caliber machine guns by 1931, 1 each on the roof of the superfiring 8-inch turrets. During a refit in 1935, platforms mounting 4 50 caliber machine guns were installed on each corner of the ship, and an additional platform was installed that wrapped around the funnel. 6 machine guns were mounted on each side of this last platform. In October 1940, 4 50 caliber Mk10 3-inch Aaa guns were installed in the corner platforms. They replaced 2 of the 50 caliber machine guns which were remounted on the tops of the 8-inch gun turrets. Another 3-inch gun was added on the roof of the deckhouse between the funnel and the island. These guns were just interim weapons until the quadruple 1.1-INCH gun mount could be fielded, which occurred in August 1941. In March 1942, Lexington's 8-inch turrets were removed at Pearl Harbor and replaced by 7 quadruple 1.1-INCH gun mounts. In addition, 22 Oerlikon 20mm cannon were installed, 6 in a new platform at the base of the funnel, 12 in the positions formerly occupied by the ship's boats in the sides of the hull, 2 at the stern and a pair on the aft control top. When the ship was sunk in May 1942, her armament consisted of 12 5-inch, 12 quadruple 1.1-INCH, 22 Oerlikons and at least 2 dozen 50 caliber machine guns. Fire control and electronics. Each 8-inch turret had a Mk30 rangefinder at the rear of the turret for local control, but they were normally controlled by 2 Mk18 fire control directors, 1 each on the fore and aft spotting tops. A 20-foot rangefinder was fitted on top of the pilot house to provide range information for the directors. Each group of 3 5-inch guns was controlled by a Mk19 director, 2 of which were mounted on each side of the spotting tops. Lexington received a RCACX-AM-1 radar in June 1941 during a brief refit in Pearl Harbor. The antenna was mounted on the forward lip of the funnel with its control room directly below the aerial, replacing the secondary conning station formerly mounted there. Armor: the waterline belt of the Lexington-class ships tapered 7 to 5 inches in thickness from top to bottom and angled 11 degrees outwards at the top. It covered the middle 530 feet of the ships. Forward, the belt ended in a bulkhead that also tapered from 7 to 5 inches in thickness. Aft, it terminated at a 7-inch bulkhead. This belt had a height of 9 feet 4 inches. The third deck over the ship's machinery and magazine was armored with 2 layers of special treatment steel totaling 2 inches in thickness. The steering gear, however, was protected by 2 layers of STS that totaled 3 inches on the flat and 4.5 inches on the slope. The gun turrets were protected only against splinters with 75 inches of armor. The conning tower was 2-2.25 inches of STS, and it had a communications tube with 2-inch sides running from the conning tower down to the lower conning position on the third deck. The torpedo defense system of the Lexington-class ships consisted of 3 to 6 medium steel protective bulkheads that ranged from 375 to 75 inches in thickness. The spaces between them could be used as fuel tanks or left empty to absorb the detonation of a torpedo's warhead.